Welcome to Tripping Over the Ottoman. I'm David Van Deusen, here with my co-host, Abby.
David and I are two superfans from totally different generations that take a deep dive into episodes of the one thing that unites us.
And that is the Dick Van Dyke Show.
And today we're going to be having a very interesting and fun discussion about a fabulous episode called The Curious Thing About Women.
This is a premiere episode, particularly to showcase Mary, and we'll talk about that as we discuss our episode.
And also that it has a few moments where you think, that's not really a Dick Van Dyke Show-esque moment. And we'll tell you why. And there'll be some interesting insights into that, I think.
The Curious Thing About Women was a season 1, episode 16, and it was written by Frank Tarloff, although the credits will say David Adler. And that's because Frank Tarloff had sort of been blackballed in the industry. So Carl appreciated and knew the work of Frank and allowed him to write this episode or pitch this episode to Carl. But they did it under the pen name of David Adler, so no one was any of the wiser.
And if anyone's younger like me and is like kind of knows what blacklisted means, but kind of doesn't, it basically means he was sort of outed from the Hollywood industry for possibly having ties to communism. This would have been in like the 50s. It seems that he wrote 3 episodes for the show, To Tell or Not to Tell, Sally's a Girl, and then The Curious Thing About Women, I believe are the 3. And interestingly, those 3 episodes are all kind of old tropes about women. The woman who thinks she wants to do show business, but then realizes it's too hard, wants to stay at home, or the Sally, she's too masculine, she's never going to get a guy kind of thing. And then of course the curiosity. I just find that interesting that this was maybe Frank's chick, he kind of had a spot for that. Probably if he's writing in the 50s, that makes a lot of sense.
You mentioned that, Abby, because Tarloff's script was actually based on a similar plot that he first wrote for the Joan Davis sitcom I Married Joan back in 1952. And he titled the original script Curiosity. And it was actually broadcast back in December 1952. And as Carl was looking for story ideas as he began the series, he was looking for pitches from other writers and took this from Frank.
You'll see that because this is season 1 of the show, and because the script in particular is even older than that, is maybe from early 1950s, that there is a little bit more of an emphasis on the disparities of the genders kind of thing. So there's a little bit more of the conflict is a little more loosey-desi, as I would put it, a little more gender butting heads. And there's also the sight gag of the boat, which I think is a little more I Love Lucy. So I think you're going to see all of that. It isn't quite what the Dick Van Dyke Show always is, but it does work really well because it has the other parts of the Dick Van Dyke Show that work, which is the sincerity and Mary's comedy, her physical comedy, everything, the camaraderie of the characters, all of that really saves it. I think if those weren't there, this might not have been as good of an episode.
I agree. Carl admitted in the end that this was a very successful show and a very funny show, but he didn't love the fact that they had to make Mary act so silly and that she actually had to go and open that boat in the final scene.
Yeah.
And he said it always bothered him that he would never have come up with a premise because much of Reiner's shows were based on his own reality. And this was not Carl's reality. This was somebody else's.
I think Mary saves it because she makes it real. She takes that silly, goofy moment and puts as much realness as she can into it. And I think it really saves it.
So this script was written in August of 1961, revised in early October 1961, filmed on the 24th of October 1961, and then didn't air until January 10th, 1962. Directed by, in those early years, John Britch. Abby and I were able to get a copy of the script, which actually was kind of fun because it was a copy of Larry Matthews' script from the show.
It was wonderful.
And we'll mention a few things along the way, but Larry's mom always was there with him on the set. And this was early in the show's run. Larry's mom has little written cues that she put in the script to remind Larry of certain things. But I think what's kind of very fun is, I just said filmed in October of 61. On some of the pages, there were little drawings of jack-o'-lanterns, which Larry must have doodled as he was waiting for rehearsals or something
amazing.
like that.
Like a time capsule. Well, and I have a couple synopsis of this episode.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah, let's hear yours first.
I have 2 of them, and they are it's funny how they both categorize Laura's reaction to this situation. They're both completely different, which makes no sense. The first one says, after bickering with Laura over her habit of preemptively opening his mail, Rob decides to write a comedy sketch based on this. A success upon broadcast, friends and acquaintances recognized Laura as the inspiration for the sketch, causing her embarrassment. Is that the one you had?
No, I have very different ones. You have any more or no?
Somewhat irked by Laura's habit of reading his mail, Rob brings it up to Sally and Buddy, and they wind up incorporating it into that week's sketch. Laura becomes furious at her husband for making fun of her on television. So
Yes.
she's either got mild embarrassment or she's furious. I don't know.
I did have that synopsis. I also have unable to control her curiosity. Laura can't resist opening a mysterious package that arrives addressed to Rob, unaware that it contains a large, self-inflating life raft.
That one seems more neutral. I like it's almost like, do they even watch the episode? Sometimes I wonder, you know.
Yes. And then I had even another which said Rob's sense of humor backfires when he decides to base a television skit on Laura's habits.
That's a good one too. Scene one opens in the kitchen, and there is an initial scene here prior to the credits. It's like there's a first scene that's 4 minutes long, and then the credits roll, and that is the credits. Is that typical of season one? I didn't remember that.
It's done quite a bit to sort of get you into the episode and sort of set the premise, and then go ahead and display the credits.
Yeah, I'm wondering if they do that in later seasons. I'm going to need to look back and see because I don't remember that as much, but perhaps I'm just remembering it wrong.
Carl used to say that he wanted a "Hey May," and what he meant by that was the show would start and the man would say, "Hey May, the show is coming on. You don't want to miss it. Hey May." And so that would hook the audience and get them interested in the episode, and then you could run the credits and proceed with the rest of the episode.
That makes a lot of sense.
Hey May.
Well, this first 4 minute scene starts in the kitchen, and Richie's at the kitchen table drinking some orange juice. And without much word, just slowly pours his own orange juice into Rob's glass, which I think was adorable. Rob enters and asks Richie where mom is, where Laura is. And he says she's out getting the mail. And then Rob, in his gentle parenting moment, takes the orange juice from his glass and gently just pours it back into Richie's glass without much word, which I thought was so sweet.
And Richie says, "How do you know? How do you know, Daddy?" And, Larry, particularly in this episode, I think is just a really cute little boy.
So adorable.
His mannerisms, his facial expressions, particularly when he says, "How do you know?"
And it's season one, too, so he's genuinely tiny. He's very small. So fun. So sweet. And you can tell kind of Dick Van Dyke's kind of melted by him sometimes, how cute he is. So Laura enters the scene, and we get the conflict of the show, which is that he says, "Any mail for me?" And she says, "Yes." And then proceeds to read his mail to him, quote unquote, give him all the details of all the mail she's just opened with his name on it and everything in it. So
Cousin Joe's getting married, right?
Agent's writing a letter, he's got to sign his contract again. All these different things she's going through, and she's just listing through them. And he's slowly getting irked by this as he's listening.
So let me just talk about something that I observed, which was an odd production issue, I guess, is many of the lines in this scene are overdubbed.
Yes, I saw the same thing.
So they must have had some trouble with the audio. There was noise or something, or the lines didn't get picked up, because several of the lines between Dick and Mary, you could tell they had to go back after the fact and
very obviously
put them in.
They did a good job dubbing, though. Like their mouths were really in sync. I wondered if it was the kitchen noise of her sort of like mixing the eggs and all of that. Like I wondered if they were just because she's doing a lot over there.
I think it's sort of fun how Rob sort of plays it a little laid back. Thank you for what, honey? For saving my eyesight. It's silly that I had to learn how to read because you just have read my mail for me.
Yeah. I love his line too. Hardly worth steaming open, huh? I love that one.
The classic line of "Don't make a federal case out of it," right? Because it's the United States mail.
And that he doesn't want condensed mail for breakfast, which I thought was great.
I like Richie's line, "Are you and mommy fighting?" And they sort of look at each other, like, sort of acknowledge, I guess they are.
Yes, we are.
But then the line, "Freddie's mommy and daddy fight a lot better."
I do love there's that ongoing narrative that like Millie and Jerry are just like at it most of the time, or loudly and aggressively. And yeah, it's pretty great.
Like you said, the famous line, "I don't like condensed mail for breakfast." And then the follow-up line was, "You left all the flavor out of it."
We do have that banter here that we don't see a lot between Rob and Laura, where it's real adversarial. I tried to look at it now as an older woman. The woman's in the kitchen. She's making breakfast for him all morning. Now she's going to stay home and do all the stuff in the house. And he's like, you know what? You want to read a letter of mine? No, I don't think so. Seems a little bit like, whoa, man, can she just open the letter? But speaking to that 50 script more so.
This is some of where we see a little of Larry's mom's note to Larry. She says, don't make any noise while you're eating, right? Take small little bites. Don't keep looking out at the audience. Engage with Dick.
There's so much to his performance that for a kid to perform that you don't even think about. All these little things he's got to remember.
This is 1961, so Larry's 6 years old.
Oh my gosh.
How much is he even reading at this stage?
Right.
Kindergarten, first grade. So she's likely teaching him his lines.
Yeah, relaying all the things to him. Yeah.
Yeah. And then as he's doing certain scenes, pointing out to him the little subtleties of what it would really be like.
It's almost harder than being an adult actor when you think about it,
Yeah.
where you can read the lines yourself.
As our scene ends, Laura ultimately concedes to Rob and promises not to do it again. And they kiss and make up. And we proceed into the office for Rob's day at work.
And in season 1 here, we spent a lot of time in the office, but as you'll hear later, I think David and I have decided that Mary's performance in this episode may have shifted the show a little bit to being more focused on the home. Because at the beginning, it's very half and half, if not anything, more office. Most of it, the part of season 1, there's the whole jealousy thing. It's very split. And so here we're back in the office. Buddy's playing darts very poorly.
And totally missing the dartboard.
Every single one. The best was Sally's response. So she's just sitting at the desk watching him, totally deadpan. Oh, you must have been practicing.
Yeah.
So dry.
And they're back and forth about what jokes can they put in this week. And Buddy tosses a joke at her. And she says, no, we can't use it. Well, why not? She says, we used it last week.
He says, was it good? She goes, yeah. Well, you see. Well, and then there's also, we've cemented that. I think we talked about this in another episode where Rob is often painted as I think it was in the shoe store episode. He's sort of painted as the college boy a lot. And there's sort of, that creates a lot of interesting dynamics between like Buddy and their kind of older generation. But here Rob likes to come up with something philosophical at the end of a show.
Yeah.
I think they've done this in a couple of other episodes where you see the writing process of him saying, well, we want to have something with depth and meaning to it or something going on. So that's kind of interesting. They talk about that here. This is just so fun because we eventually here, we're going to get to see their writing process and it's awesome. And you're just waiting for it.
Some of the philosophy, however, comes from Aunt Agnes. She utters the lines of Aunt Agnes, which I don't recall. I don't know if you have them there.
They're sure they made no sense. So
in the end, Sally says she wants to cry. And Buddy says, why? She says, because I think Aunt Agnes is a nut.
And I don't know if that's the first appearance of Aunt Agnes, but it's a great one. We get introduced to Honest Rob here, who Buddy and Sally are like, why don't we just steal some ideas from another show? And they say, well, Honest Rob won't let us. So he's very established as him as this good guy again, which we'll see come up over and over, but especially season 1. Very, very moral man. Rob enters the office and says he's late because he got a little family problem at home.
And proceeds to explain the difficulty that he had with Laura opening his mail. And what does he say? And I cuffed her.
We get here that Buddy and Sally are really his sounding board, which is kind of cool. There was confidence.
Yes.
He's gonna really trust them as friends. Like I'm gonna give you this conflict. Tell me what you think of it. Give me some advice, which is kind of cool. See that again and again. He even sits down on the couch like he's in therapy, kind of talking to them. But during the course of talking about it, and this is one of the things Dave and I were discussing before this, is he makes a reference to cuffing her around a little bit. Does a little bit kind of a slapping motion. I thought, well, maybe I'm just too young. I don't know what that reference is. Maybe it doesn't mean what I think it means. When I looked it up, and it does kind of mean that, which would more again reflect that older time period where maybe domestic violence was more tolerated or not considered unacceptable yet or abusive. And so I can't make out what Sally says after that, but that kind of just blow past it. Does not like a big thing about it, but it definitely gets mentioned, which is weird because he doesn't do that. So, I guess it's more of a joke, kind of thing. You get that Rob would not do that. Like he's not that type of person.
That was sort of verbal cuffing more than it was certainly physical.
Yeah, absolutely.
But he picks up on Rob's explanation and says, oh, wait, we could maybe use this somehow in a sketch. Alan Brady can say, maybe I could get you a letter opener. Well, no, thanks. I'm married to one.
We don't see this that often in the show, but when we do, it's one of my favorite parts of the show is when you see them writing a sketch together. It's what makes the show unique. You don't see that in other shows at that time. Maybe even now, you're seeing a bunch of writers or comedians coming up with bits, coming up with sketches. It's so much fun. And I think as a kid, that was like, wow, I didn't know this existed. This is so cool. And also here, interesting thing to note as we go into it, Sally, being a woman, is not at all on the same plane as Laura's kind of feminine curiosity, kind of tropey thing. Like she's a female writer and she contributes a third of this act just as all of them do. She's right there in
Yes.
it. So it's kind of funny. The show's almost walking that line where it's like just about to cross over, but it's still hanging on a little bit with that old script.
And you're right. Sally actually says the feminine curiosity idea.
Yeah.
And through the discussion, one of my favorite parts of this episode, and it's used in other certain scenes throughout the rest of the series, is Buddy's Mysteriosa, where he says, "Doodle-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo." Maybe this was the first time that was used.
It might be. I do love the one I forget what episode it is. Believe me, doodly do, or
Yes.
something like I can't remember what that was now.
the shortened version of that.
Well, and then we also see that everyone's contributing, but they're really just springboards a little bit for Rob's talent, and you'll see that they're contributing at the beginning, but then once it takes off, they're like, "All right, you do the bit. It's yours now." And then they interject. You can see why he's the head writer here all of a sudden.
This is one of the classic scenes. All of a sudden, Sally says, "Hey, I got it. Don't anybody move!" Right? And with that, Buddy dashes up and says, "What? What?" And she says, "Hey, you moved. Now I forgot."
She does it a couple times in the show. It's so funny. She's so great. They're all coming up with bits. They're deciding this is a bit of a woman who's opens her husband's mail, and then the sketch ends up being that a mysterious package arrives, and that's when kind of Rob takes over. And so he does this whole bit of this woman, who's sort of being called to this package, like a magnet, and he uses all of these bits, but he's really just riffing about all these things. He's writing it on the fly, and you see like, oh man, he's really good at this. Buddy and Sally start contributing. I think there's the part where, well, maybe the kid hides it from her. She's on him like a tiger. You little dirty rat. Where'd you put it? Kind of thing. Sally's great at that. And they're all kind of play acting all the roles back and forth.
The mother says to the little boy, "Don't do what I told you. Do what I tell you." Buddy's great line, though, is "Packages Anonymous."
Oh, yeah.
Ignorance here. I don't know when Alcoholics Anonymous was established. Do you know?
I was thinking the same thing. I don't know. I would guess 50s.
But the fact that they came up with this Packages Anonymous was probably very relatable to the world scenario at the time.
What was the Lost Weekend crystal chandelier or chandelier fall? I did not know what that was a reference to. I'll have to ask someone else.
I don't know either. Fans, if you know, send us a note and tell us what that was.
Please do. And then they have to come up with something silly in the package, which I think that was a hilarious discussion that her husband put there, to trap her. And Buddy says, I think it was like a 5-pound bag of sour cream or something, or something to sour cream. Rob goes, "We used too much sour cream already," which I think was so funny.
Sally says, "Well, how about 15 pounds of hair?" To which Buddy, you never know what to expect, says, "Well, hair is good, but make it 32 pounds. Why 32? Because 32 is always funnier," he says. "Well, what do you mean?" So he says, "Try me." So somebody says 32 and hysterical. Buddy goes hysterical.
And then Sally's, "I gotta admit, he's right."
Remember this interplay about 32, because we'll talk about that a little later.
Rob says, No. Wait, I got it. A boat. And then Sally's my favorite line. "A boat with hair?" No, just a boat.
The inflatable boat. I just ordered one through the Army's supply store or something.
And then Buddy has the idea, well, it's going to be funny because we're going to put her in a tiny closet and the raft is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So they all agree this is the funniest sketch ever. Now, in the course of the sketch writing, they've accidentally, you see it during the writing, they've accidentally started incorporating Laura's name into it as they're doing back and forth. So we see like that might be a problem later.
The other idea, Buddy realizes this sketch is sort of gold. So he says, "Rob, you go home and have another fight with Laura, and then we'll have a sketch for next week."
Which they do that very often. They use things just like Carl did. So now we enter next scene, which is the home again, the Petrie home. We now have Laura and Richie there in front of the television, but Millie and Jerry have also joined them. And here we see a very pregnant Ann Gilbert, looks like, which they hide her with what I was telling David. It looks like she's wearing one of those like lead things used for like an X-ray. They just no showing it whatsoever. Yeah,
Anna's actually pregnant with her daughter Hallie, who is also today an actress. Hallie Withrow. Fans probably know Hallie being the mom on Lizzie McGuire on the Disney Channel from years ago.
Very cool.
Hallie also was on an episode of Diagnosis Murder with Dick in later years.
The worlds unite. So we get there's some music playing on the TV. They're watching the show. The sketch hasn't started yet. We get this as like the opening band or the opening number or something. And they say, "Did Rob tell you anything about the show?" And she said, "Well, he wants me to experience just like, regular viewer and watch it. But there's a sketch that he said I inspired him about." Then there's a really great Millie Jerry banter back and forth about the
Yes.
poem, which is just like I love their dynamic. It's so funny. She says, "Oh, Jerry was said I inspired a poem once." And then what is it? Is it Elizabeth Browning? How do I love thee? Or he says, how do I love you? Let me count the ways. And Laura says, isn't that Elizabeth Browning? He says, no, that was how I love thee. Let me count the ways. Mine is, how do I love you? Let me count the ways.
To which Millie says, "Oh, it's very different." Yeah, very different. Yeah.
So Laura's really excited, though, because she's this Rob's muse for this, apparently. She says, oh, behind every great man. She's very excited to see how she's going to have, influenced or inspired this sketch. We don't see the sketch. We hear it, which is very cool. And we're just hearing it and watching the reactions of all the characters that are watching it, which is very fun.
And early on, they use the name Laura, as you mentioned. And Richie remarks, "Oh, Mom, they're using your name."
She's like,
Oh,
huh.
yeah. And Laura sort of looks at him. And we hear the voiceover of the actor. So interesting. Carl is playing the
Yep.
role of the father, which you would think Alan Brady might do, right?
Hmm.
And in the course of the dialogue, calls her Miss Snoopy Nose, his wife. Then we hear the wife's voice. And actually, this was, I think, her first role on the Van Dyke Show, but it was the actress Patty Reagan. Patty was in Solon the Sponsor, to the
Arlene.
Party, and Bupkiss.
Oh, yeah, she's the receptionist in Bupkiss.
Right. But here we just hear her voice back and forth.
Which is very recognizable.
It is. Once you know her and you
Mhm.
listen to it, then you absolutely recognize her voice. And then was a young boy playing Richie, if you will, even though we didn't call him Richie, by a young man named of Leslie Barringer. This was notated in Carl's script. And
Very
he was
cool.
actually a 9-year-old child actor who had credits on Loretta Young and Ozzie and Harriet, the Donna Reed Show, and more. Just sort of interesting. They don't get acknowledgments in the final credits, but they were noted in Carl's handwriting in the script as to who was going to do the voiceovers.
That was really
So,
cool.
little behind the scenes things.
Now, when they're shooting this, do you think that they're hearing a recording of what's happening somehow so the audience can hear it? I wonder.
I'm thinking they're hearing it somehow, whether they're standing off stage, they're just doing it because the natural timing that's occurring between Jerry and Millie and Laura and Richie.
Yeah, it seems like it doesn't have any gaps, so
Right.
something's going on there. Yeah, they do it well. And we can see here, by the way, this is exactly what we're talking about before, is this script is a little dated. It works for the Alan Brady show, which we get is sometimes a little bit maybe on the older end of the spectrum or has trouble being current. Rob's really, when Rob came in, he really sort of revamped the show and made it more current. So you get that, like, if the script is working for the Alan Brady show, it might be a little too under-sophisticated for Dick Van Dyke Show. The sketch is starting, and slowly we see that the Laura character is, what does Laura call her later? A wild-eyed maniac. She's just this like crazy character, and she's not happy about it.
And it's almost a direct retelling of what had transpired between Rob and Laura at the breakfast table. In fact, Richie remarks, "It's just like what happened to you and Daddy, Mommy."
And lines, direct lines, things that she said or he said, yeah, being reiterated. So she's slowly coming, oh, wait a minute, this is us. Millie and Jerry, by the end of the episode they're watching, they're dying laughing. I mean, just hysterical. Jerry's like narrating what's happening.
And believing that this really happened to you, Laura. And Laura's almost beside herself.
I think, well, why didn't you use the scissors, Laura? They're directing the questions at her. She's like, I don't know. I'm not there. It wasn't me.
But Laura continues to deny any correlation between what's happening on the television and what happened with her, and that the character is not her, right? She's not wild and crazy eyed like they're portraying this woman.
And then the final scene of the boat inflating, they're both absolutely doubled over. And Jerry says, this is great because it's true to life. And then do they leave right away? I can't remember if they leave right after the show or if we cut back to her on the phone. I can't remember.
Richie goes off to bed, and I think they're there when Laura gets a call from Martha talking about, relating to the sketch, who's been watching the show as well, and saying, she can believe that Laura's like that. Laura, again, is trying to tell her, no, that's not me, Martha.
And Millie and Jerry still aren't convinced either. So they go home. So now we have Laura in the next scene by herself at home. And she's on the phone again. We get the sense that she's been on the phone all night, fielding these crazy calls. Was on the phone with someone called Larry, saying all kind of the similar things. It's not me. That didn't happen to us. And in the middle of this, Rob comes home in the exact opposite mood.
He's ecstatic about how successful the sketch was and how well received it was. In the meantime, Laura's very standoffish and very deadpan and very
Yes.
dry. To which Rob says, are you okay? And Laura's line is, well, I'd actually prefer not to answer because I'm afraid it'll end up on next week's show.
As a wife who's always complaining or something like that. And then Rob says, well, you don't think people thought it was you, did you? And she has to recount to him, like, I've been getting calls all night. Of course it was similar. And that the woman that played me was a wild-eyed maniac. Some of the other skits that I've inspired, they've been normal women. And this one was crazy.
And the woman who's named Laura.
And Rob says it wasn't intentional. It just happened.
But I like that she says, you went on television and advertised to 20 million people that I'm a pathological Snoopy nose. To which Rob says, well, it was 40 million people, not 20.
He does that a lot, puts his foot in his mouth like, oh man. Well, interesting to me though, somehow in the 50s script of this character, Rob is more upset that his wife read a letter from him than he thinks his wife should be upset by the fact that he humiliated her on television in front of 40 million people. Like somehow that's not a big deal, which I think is so strange. Laura exits and closes the bedroom door, and Rob tries to get in and says, honey, the door is jammed. It's not jammed, it's locked. Which is great.
Rob gets it very quickly
Yes.
then, doesn't he? Morning turns, and we're back in the office.
With his confidants again.
Rob and Sally are there, and Rob's explaining to Sally that every additional phone call that came was just another nail in his coffin toward cementing what Laura had said.
And one of our favorite Maury bits is coming up. Buddy enters the door. He's the same as Rob was the other night, just ecstatic. The reviews are great. It's going on and on.
Rob and Sally are a bit indifferent to his enthusiasm. Yep. And Rob sort of says, well, we got a little problem here. And he says, what's that? Sally and Rob explain that Laura's all upset because...
Let me say before that, too, was our favorite Maury line where he says, oh, the reviews were great. It was magnificent. It was awesome. And then they're just staring at him. He goes, what's the matter? We fired? And then Sally's like, gotta hand it to him. He's got a flexible mind. It's like went from like 0 to 100 to 0. We're the best show ever. Now we're fired.
They explained the scenario. And as they're explaining the scenario, Buddy, again, you could start to see him light up. And they sort of look at him and he says, that's it. That's the sketch for next week. At which point, Rob sort of stands up out of his chair and approaches Buddy, and Buddy backs down. And his buddy's explaining it. He says, we could do this, we could do that. And as Rob approaches, Buddy says, or like,
that's the best.
Where are we going? This is where I thought we could share again a little piece of the script that did not make it to air, which was this little or exchange. We end with or and we move on to the next scene in our televised version. But Buddy actually says more about this. Sally says, that's what? And Buddy says, this could be next week's sketch. Alan's a television writer, see, and he has experience with his wife at home, and he uses it for a sketch on his show. His wife sees it and gets sore. Now, at this point, Rob's gotten up and is walking menacingly toward him. But he says, or, and that's where the scene ended. But in this case, he says, we could do an animal sketch. The mother turkey says to the baby turkey, you bad little turkey, if your father could see you now, he'd turn over in his gravy. Rob doesn't laugh, which Sally says, try 32. Remember our reference earlier to 32. And Buddy says, 32. Rob still doesn't laugh. Buddy says, boy, Laura must really be sore. Tell you what, I'll call her and explain the sketch was my idea. Rob says, you can try, but it won't do any good. And Buddy says, I'll take the blame for the whole thing. Sally says, and tell her that I typed in the name Laura. That was my fault, not Rob's. At which point, Rob apparently has started to begin dialing Laura on the telephone. And Rob says to them, well, that's what I'll be getting from Laura for the next 2 weeks. And Sally says, what's that? A busy signal.
I love that they brought back the 32 in the script. That's what they should have kept that in. That was hilarious.
Yes.
So great.
Yeah.
Well, now we go home again. We're back home. We know Laura's mad. She's by herself, and the doorbell rings. Millie and Jerry at the door. And they come in. they're apologizing for their behavior when they watch the show with her. They don't believe she was like the girl in the sketch, and they're really sorry that they thought it was, and they understand.
At which point, the doorbell rings again,
And who's at the door? Frank Adamo.
delivering a package. So up to this point, Jerry and Millie have been very apologetic and very contrite, but as soon as the package arrives, they quickly break down and start laughing again.
Slow realization where they look at each other like, is that what we think it is? There's a package at the door.
And they have no words. And all they can do is run out of the house because they simply cannot contain themselves.
Just doubled over, shaking their heads in silence. So they both run out. Of course, Laura's trying to explain the whole time while they're there. Well, this is just a package. It's not for me. It's for Rob. And they're like, okay. And do you want some coffee? And they can't react to her. They run out. Here we're left with probably the best scene in the entire episode. Maybe one of the best scenes for Mary Tyler Moore, period, in the show. She has 5 minutes left in the episode, and it's the best 5 minutes. And I'll just say here, her physical comedy, you have to remember, Mary Tyler Moore was 24 in the first season. I was looking up Lucille Ball in I Love Lucy. She was 40 years old when that show first aired. 40 years old. And had a ton of comedic experience before that in radio and things like that.
When she did Lucy Ricardo, you mean?
Yeah, when she was in I Love Lucy, yeah, played Lucy Ricardo. Yeah, and before that, she had done similar show with the same character on a radio. So she had all this experience, already and was so much older. And yet here you have this 24-year-old who had done no comedy prior to this, correct? She's just nailing it. And I think even at times rivals Lucille Ball. No shame to the Lucy lovers out there. I love her too. But almost rivals her because she brings a realness to the silly situation, the silly physical comedy. And I think that's why it's 10 times funnier, because you think like, I could picture myself doing that because it's based in a reality, kind of like how Carl would want it, I feel like.
Much broader, more reminiscent of the I Love Lucy days of comedy for sure. But Mary definitely makes it her own.
It's 5 minutes of just comedy genius, in my opinion. And I wonder, is Dick Van Dyke helping her a lot in the first season? She's learning probably from just watching, I imagine, watching everybody else, and they're all learning from each other. In this 5 minutes, it's her against the package.
The package is now down on the dining room floor.
Very big package.
Very intrigued, sort of back and forth across the room. At one point, walks by and looks at the package. Mr. Robert Petrie. Turns around and away she goes.
Walks confidently back into the kitchen. Then she comes through again. She does an immediate 180. Comes right back out. Walks back in the living room. She walks right past it, doesn't look at it, goes over and fluffs a pillow. And then as she's walking back to the kitchen without looking at it, as if, well, that box isn't calling to me at all, has one brief look where she looks down at it, looks away right again, and just walks right back into the kitchen. She just needed a glimpse,
We should discuss eagle-eyed fans. We can read the address on the box of the package, which reads as 448 Bonnie Meadow Road. So fans for years have been debating about what is the Petrie's address. And although this says 448, most fans would say that was wrong because there are many times that it's referred to as 148.
Now, I had seen it. I thought it said 468. So listeners, go look in there, take a screenshot, tell us what you see. You probably are right, David. You probably have clear vision than I do. And I couldn't make out who it was from, like Easy something, New York. It's probably just some, made up company, I imagine.
Now, of course, their address was Carl Reiner's actual address. Cool. He lived on 48 Bonnie Meadow Road in New Rochelle or Scarsdale. And Carl ended up, as he described it, putting a 1 in front of the 48 to make it 148 so that fans would not go house hunting and look for that house, because there was actually in reality no 148 Bonnie Meadow Road. The numbers ended much before that.
Now you can go now, though, to 48 Bonnie Meadow Road, correct? And it's called that now. Like there's been some sort of other sign up there to commemorate it, correct?
Yes. So it's duly named Bonnie Meadow Road and Dick Van Dyke Show Way. And there's 2 signs actually mounted on the post at the end of the street.
She's back in the kitchen now, but when she comes out the next time, she's losing the grip. She comes out kind of biting her nails, kind of slow, like, I don't know, I can't stop looking at the thing. I can't stop myself. So she comes over and she does all these little moves to be like, to almost convince herself, like, I'm not trying to open the package. I'm moving a chair around here. I'm going to kick the side of the box a little bit. And she just does all these little movements of I'm just doing my house duties, fluffing pillows, no big deal. And the best part, I think, that starts is when she moves that chair to directly in front of the package. Yes. She takes a dining room chair and she's She's kind of fussing with, oh, maybe I'll move it here, maybe I'll move it here kind of thing. And at the last minute, she grabs it and just like hauls it to the middle and sits down in it, like all in one swoop, you know? She's just going to sit and ponder the package now.
And with that, takes her foot and starts to try to edge the string and see if she can't make it snap or pop or get her foot under it. Then she's down on the floor, pulling at the string with her hands. That's not working. So what do we all do? Let's start biting the string and see with our teeth if we can't get the string to give.
And I think that's the moment it kind of goes off the rails. Like, well, she's got to use her teeth. She'll do anything now, you know? Just like bites the string off, gets the strings off, and there's one string left. And she goes to pull it off. And instead of the string, we realize it's the cord for the inflatable raft. And when she pulls it, the raft starts inflating. The box opens up completely. I mean, it's hilarious. And you wonder, like, it looks almost like she's the one doing it because of where she places her hand. I think there is actually like a ripcord in there that she's triggering. I would assume anyway.
In the copy of the script that we have, there was a point where Richie was actually supposed to enter during the scene with Laura looking around the boat.
Interesting.
And say, you know, Mommy, what are you doing? And she says, Richie, go outside and play. So whether that was ultimately in there and they cut it out.
Yeah, and whether that was cut for time or cut because it was maybe referencing that Alan Brady show skits too much. I don't know.
Another takeoff on what we actually see in the final version compared to what was intended. And I asked Mary one time, did you have a chance to rehearse with this lifeboat? And her recollection was no.
Wow.
This was the take. And she just had to improvise and go with it as that lifeboat inflated in front of her.
Wow. And I'll look back too. I'm wondering if there was even a cut in there. You know, when she comes and moves the chair, I don't think that there was. I'll have to look again.
I don't believe there is either.
Unbelievable.
The boat starts to inflate and it's big. And she sort of drags it toward the front closet.
I know, like, where's she going? Where does she think she's going with it? Like, she's going to take it out the front door.
And then decides, well, maybe head toward the bedroom.
Yes.
So she drags it toward the bedroom. And as she's doing that, she hears the offstage voice of Rob from the kitchen. Honey, I'm home. And she's like, oh, boy.
At this point, she's got the raft like up against the bedroom doorway and she's standing behind it. Rob comes in and, yeah, honey, did a package come for me? He figures out she's behind it.
I like first when Rob comes in, he sort of comes in and he almost just startled, scared, like he stops and almost like turns around and runs out like, right. What the heck is that? And says, who is it? Honey, are you in there? And
are you in there? Yes.
The best line is sort of cautiously and with a little tongue in cheek. Honey, did a package come for me? And she peeks around the edge so very sweet, sheepishly and nods her head.
Well, and then you get so much of Rob in the moment of like, yeah, he might have had a problem with this, but when he's faced with it in reality, he loves his wife and he thinks she's adorable. And you get that right there of like, I used to be mad at this, but now that I see that this is a charming part of your personality, I love you. You know, that's sweet.
Well, as you mentioned, this episode, along with the blonde-haired brunette, began to really showcase Mary's ability. And what I have are some thoughts shared by Mary and her husband, Robert Levine, telling us about that time in the show's history.
It was the first time I was ever given a block of comedy to do. It was a la the master himself, and it was terrifying because I saw it there. I spotted it. This is the kind of thing that Dick would have a field day with. And, you know, I kept hoping that I would come close to doing justice to the spot, and I guess it did work very well.
As Mary started to emerge, as she kind of demonstrated her own comedy chops, things started to shift to home. And Carl started writing for Mary and giving her more challenges and allowing her to do more and exercise, you know, her comedy reflexes. Later in the first season, Mary would say, curious thing about women, that was another one where she got to play a little broader, you know, a little bit more physical comedy. I think she felt cemented her as a comedy lead, notwithstanding the fact that she had limited experience and was so young.
Oh, it's really cool. Very cool that you have that, David.
So we now move to the final scene of the episode. And this banter, again, I think is pretty fun.
So sweet.
Laura starts off saying, if you sent this boat to trap me, you're going to be in big trouble. And he's, honey, I had ordered that boat. That's what gave me the idea for the sketch the whole time.
And so we get Rob. Rob's a good guy. He just was using something from life. He would never trap his wife. That's not something Rob would do. And then he also imparts into us this moral lesson where he says, honey, it's natural to be curious. We all, not women, we all want to know what's inside things. And I think that kind of saves the episode too a little bit. This isn't just a women problem. This is just a people problem. It's a human problem, which is very validating for her.
And then Rob sort of says, when are we going to stop this polite talking and begin with serious kissing?
In the first season, they're genuinely smitten. You can see it, or they're playing smitten very well, but they are very locked eyes. Their chemistry is unbelievable. They're so sweet together. It's such a loving relationship that you can watch. Because even like in I Love Lucy, when they make up, yeah, they love each other again, but there's an asterisk, like this is going to happen next week. Like I feel like here it's like a genuine love, genuine care for each other that's coming through all the time.
And fans of the show definitely believed that Rob and Laura were a married couple, despite their significant age difference.
As a kid, I always did.
Dick in his mid-30s and Mary in her early 20s. That was one of Dick's concerns early on when Mary was hired, was of the age difference, but that quickly went off as not a concern.
Didn't matter. You bought it. I as a kid, I always thought they were married. Never didn't occur to me otherwise.
The chemistry between them is just incredible.
So they kiss and make up, and then Laura asks, so how do we deflate this thing? They're sitting on the side of the boat by now. How do we deflate this thing? And Rob says, oh, well, let me show you.
Rob turns something on the boat to deflate it, but he says, I need to go get the pliers, and departs out of the room.
Which leaves Laura alone with the boat. So now you have a scene, it's just the boat in the middle of the room, Laura kneeling down next to it, trying to deflate it. And the doorbell rings, and she says, oh, come in. And Millie and Jerry walk in to the scene, and they take one look at the boat, one look at Laura. They look at each other and just lose it. They just absolutely lose it. Run out. End of the episode.
In my notes here, I wrote, they deteriorate into convulsive laughter and go running back out of the house.
I just love the first moment when they look at each other like, are you seeing this?
Jerry and Millie in this episode are just fantastic.
They're so good together too. So many duos in the, you got Maury and Rosemary, Dick and Mary, Millie and Jerry, amazing chemistry together, amazing dynamic, so wonderful. The show has the I Love Lucy-esqueness going on because it was written in the 50s. It's got the big sight gag of the boat, which reminds me kind of like the bread coming out of the oven, and like an I Love Lucy episode type of thing.
Right.
It works though, and it works because, and the couple moments of like, slapping her around, what's that about? A couple moments like that were a little bit odd for the show. Again, because of that older script and it being season 1, it's still a great episode because you have Mary Tyler Moore shining, an absolute physical comedy gold. You have all the wonderful sincerity and heartwarmingness that it has. You have that Rob's character is a stand-up guy. He's not the crazy guy in the Ellen Brady Show sketch. You get the Laura isn't the crazy girl in the Ellen Brady Show sketch. So they're coming at it from love. And then they also decide, hey, this isn't just a woman problem. This is an everybody problem. And I find it endearing, kind of is the end of it. And I just think that all really makes it work. It's one that I often would say, oh, that line's a little strange. But I never disliked it ever because it worked in all those other ways so magnificently.
It would be interesting to know what script Carl actually started out with and how Carl nuanced it to make it more of his own.
I would wonder if he was even more sort of dated or 50s-ish when he got it. Yeah, I'm assuming so.
Right.
Yeah, he did a great job.
I'm sure that he reworked it some, as he would do, to try to be true to the characters as best he could. But I agree that this is a very fun episode, and it does sort of set the stage for more opportunities for Mary to show her comic abilities as the show moves on.
And she starts shining really quickly into the series. Leave in the comments what you think about this show in terms of its hints at the 50s there and sort of maybe the gender type thing. I'm just curious what people think when they watch it. If it bothers them, if it doesn't bother them, that kind of thing.
I'm glad that we picked this episode to go back and reminisce, and hope that all of you enjoyed our discussion about today's show, The Curious Thing About Women.
And just make sure to subscribe to our channel, and you can get notified when new episodes are available.
Remember, we are a community, so we value your comments, your questions, your contributions to the discussion about this show and all the shows that we do. So feel free to leave some feedback on our channel or send an email to trippingovertheottoman@gmail.com with the subject of Box 7030. For today, I'm David.
And I'm Abby. Thanks for tripping over the Ottoman with us. We'll see you next time.